Have held talks in Muscat. Iran's top negotiator, Abbas Araghchi, says they discussed the security situation in the Strait of Hormuz. Also on the agenda were what are being called appropriate mechanisms for ships to safely pass through the strait in accordance with the Memorandum of Understanding signed almost a month ago. The Omani foreign minister has repeated his support for diplomatic efforts to prevent further escalation. Rasul Sardar has the latest from the Iranian capital, Tehran.
After days of escalation between Iran and the United States, the mediators are intensifying their diplomatic efforts. A Qatari delegation on Friday visited Tehran, trying to convince both parties to return to the negotiating table. On Saturday, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi traveled to Muscat, the capital of Oman, to meet his Omani counterpart, and the meetings have lasted 4 hours. So they have focused particularly on the Strait of Hormuz and how to establish an appropriate mechanism to manage the maritime traffic through this critical choke point. Oman has drafted a proposal, and that is suggesting 2 separately controlled routes. The first one is going to be called the northern route that goes through the Iranian territorial water controlled by Iran, and any ships that are trying to pass through that route need to get the approval from Iranians, but without transit fees. And the southern route is going to run through the Omani territorial water, but there will not be transit fees, and the passage of the ships is going to be free under the pre-war conditions. So far, Iranians have not been keen to accept it because Tehran fears that such a scenario, 2 separately controlled roads, will bypass Iran, and Iran will lose its biggest leverage in the negotiations. However, we know that the mediators and the regional countries are pressing hard to make sure that there is a solution and the both parties can agree on a formula that somehow could prevent another war in the region. Rasul Sardar, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
Okay, let's get more on the wider implications of this with David Deroche. He's a former Pentagon Director of Arabian Peninsula Affairs, and he's now a professor at the Thayer Marshall Institute. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. David, it's always great to have you on Al Jazeera. I want to widen this out a little bit because we are in a kind of hiatus situation at the moment, certainly with regard to negotiations and in the light of the attacks we just saw. The U.S. appears to have been relying on a strategy of hitting Iranian targets as well as sanctions. Neither of those seem to have had the effect that the U.S. might have been hoping for. Are there other options it could consider, or is the U.S. locked into that approach?
Well, when the MOU was implemented, the United States withdrew its blockade of Iranian ports. That was goods going out and goods coming in. And as you noted, there were sanctions on Iranian oil. They lifted the sanctions. So after the attack on the neutral civilian shipping in Omani waters, the United States reimposed the oil sanctions and also conducted military strikes against targets in Iran. But they did not reimpose the blockade. So the U.S. still has 1 or 2 things besides bombing them harder, wider, and with targets that are dual use instead of just military use. So there are some options, but they're certainly not attractive because Iran's strategy here is not really a military one. It's based on promoting uncertainty among commercial markets, in this instance, the maritime insurance market. So all they have to do is keep insurance clerks in London nervous, and they achieve their goals. So it's a very, very difficult thing, and that's why you're seeing President Trump saying that Iran has to renounce these attacks. He's trying to restore confidence. That's hard.
I want to get your thoughts on the broader strategy in this, particularly with regard to the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. have been using several different systems, as I understand it, including Tomahawks, THAAD systems, and air-to-surface missiles as well. Iran has been able to shut down the Strait of Hormuz using fast boats and drones. Do you think the U.S., or to what extent do you think the U.S. is looking at this situation and maybe looking at situations that may arise in the future and rethinking the way that it approaches a conflict like this?
Man, I'm so glad you asked that question. I wrote a paper about 10 years ago called Dominance versus Disruption, where I pointed out that, all Iran has to do is mess things up. It's very cheap to do that. just a threat will achieve Iran's desired end, or firing one missile at a civilian ship. The United States, to achieve its goals, has to completely control the Gulf. Iran just has to prevent ships from going through. The United States has to ensure that ships can go through without being interfered. And that is a disproportionate burden. It is incredibly expensive and time-consuming. So, it's basically, as I said earlier, a crisis of confidence, and confidence is a psychological state of mind. You can try to bomb your way back into confidence, but that's a very, very hard thing, and it would require Iran to knuckle under. So I don't think we've ever quite come to grips with this. And then, of course, the distance. Iran can launch one small boat out of a commercial harbor along with 15 fishing boats and achieve their desired strategic effect, but we have to travel tens of thousands of miles to try to achieve our strategic effect. That makes it hard as well. I don't think that we've ever fully dealt with this problem.
There's been a lot of speculation as well about the levels of U.S. stockpiles of munitions in the course of this. I was looking at some figures suggesting the U.S. has used between about half and a third of its Patriot missile inventory, but so have the Gulf countries, which also use Patriot missiles. If the U.S. focuses on rebuilding its own stocks of Patriots, which one would imagine it wants to do, given it's trying to cover such large areas of the world, where do you think that's going to leave the Gulf nations and their requirements?
Well, that's a good question. So first off, there's two different types of Patriots. There's PAC-2 and PAC-3, and I think that they've added additional assembly lines. But the broader issue, it's actually worse than you stated, because we also have the requirement to produce Patriot for Ukraine and our European allies who are nervous about Russia. So there is a stress on specific guided munitions. And our commercial industrial base, which is run on a profit basis, has not been producing stockpiles in the orders that we need. I think that what you're seeing is rationalization across partners and allies, increased production. We just had President Trump just said that he was going to license Patriot for Ukrainian production, and I think we're going to see license for European production. All of that will assist our Gulf partners. But at the end of the day, if you look at some of the Gulf facilities, you have U.S. batteries side by side with indigenous batteries. They're all kind of firing the same missiles. So it's a shared problem. But certainly we've seen in recent weeks, at least in terms of offensive missiles, the United States has been able to establish enough air dominance that we've shifted from limited, expensive offensive missiles to dropping less expensive gravity bombs. And that's the asymmetry that favors the United States. And we just saw that in those airstrikes. Those were mostly airdrop bombs that only cost $45,000 each or so.
I'd just like to finally kind of widen it out to a more global view. Like, the Trump administration has boosted spending in terms of munitions production, and you just refer to elements of it there, but it also has used a large proportion of its munitions in the war against Iran, as we've been talking. It is going to take time to replenish those stocks, as well as you were just describing, the production process for bringing in new Patriots and so on. How vulnerable do you think that leaves the U.S. with regard to the rest of the world?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So, well, Patriot is the world beater in low-level air defense, and THAAD is the world beater at medium-level air defense. So to the extent that, we have multiple commitments, Europe, Middle East, East Asia, there is a moment of suboptimal inventory, but we're not at an emergency point. There are other systems coming into being that are compatible. So Europe is building air defense systems. The South Korean system, which is compatible with Patriot, has been purchased, I think, by the United Arab Emirates that can augment their capability. So there are substitutes. And then there are instances where we get partners who are not threatened to cross levels. So, for example, a Greek Patriot battery was transferred to Saudi Arabia a few years ago. But it's certainly not an ideal situation. It's one that's going to require a sustained effort and focus to get to where I think we should be.
David DeRoche is a former Pentagon Director of Arabian Peninsula Affairs and a professor at the Thayer Marshall Institute. And David, as always, we're very grateful to have you on Al Jazeera. Thank you.